Hello and welcome to the program. It's Susanne here, and I'm going to talk to you about project management superpower as an autistic project manager. So unlocking the strengths that I found that I had in a project management world. Today I'm going to talk a little bit about seeing the risks first, which was thought to be a strength until it was called negativity. So you can imagine how that felt for me. One of the earliest patterns in my career was that I was a bit like the canary in the mineshaft. I saw risks and problems probably before other people did. It's not because I was anxious. It's not even because I was negative. It's because my brain works in a way that connects patterns, dependencies, and weak signals. So I do a lot of observations, and then my brain works to put things into patterns, and as things are being put into patterns, I can see where connections don't meet properly. So I would raise concerns early. Now, before I was a project manager and understood how risk management worked, I would do this anyway, and I was always called a troublemaker. I was probably a troublemaker when I was a little girl at school. I was always up at the headmistress's or headmaster's office. So I was always a troublemaker, and I was difficult because I would call things out. Sometimes they would be dismissed, but more often than not, people would tell me that I was overthinking or that I was negative. And I've been told that I am negative my entire life, really. But for me, inside here, I don't see myself as negative, although sometimes I will talk about negative behaviours that I observe in other people, or things that are really, as we know in project management land, a risk. The overthinking thing is a real problem, I think, for autistic people. It's a way that we are, and we have to think about things in a way that most neurotypical people don't have to do. For example, I have to look at your face and see what your expression is and try and work out in my head not only what that expression is, but how I'm supposed to respond to it. And before you say, oh yes, I do that too, it is different because you will automatically start responding in a social situation, whereas for me, I have to look, think about it, and then work out from my database how I'm supposed to respond. So I'd often get people that would say, wait and see, it's not going to happen, particularly before I was a project manager of any seniority. People would often just, call me a troublemaker, as I said. But this pattern recognition is a really powerful thing in autism. And if you are always discouraged or overlooked or told that you're overthinking or that you're negative, it's very distressing as an autistic person because you have to do this in order to get on with your everyday life. Every day, I don't think people realise, we are looking at things around us and working out, how should I respond to that? What is that person saying? What do they actually mean? What's that social cue? I don't really understand what that one is. So we're already working overtime. The more often that I was dismissed, the more I would get distressed. And that would be very difficult, as I said, before I started in project management. But as I started in project management, I learnt the risk management framework that we all know and how to apply those skills. And by that I mean how to define what the risk is, and not just the issue, but there is a really, it's very important to define a risk properly, I've found in my experience. Most people do not define a risk properly, and I find if you don't do that, the risk is easily dismissed. But if you define it very clearly as a statement, and then with what will happen if that risk occurs, it ceases to just be a sentence and people start to take a bit of notice. So it's really good in projects, but the personal toll for me was difficult. So I would often tend to stay quiet, but I would often see the injustice in things because something was going wrong and nothing was being done to mitigate whatever was happening. So there was an emotional weight of watching things that I knew could have been avoided, but the problem continued to unfold. So being right too early can be very lonely. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell about risk management. And I thought I would just move on a little bit to the famous hyperfocus that we get told that we have as autistic people, which we do. And learning how to manage that hyperfocus is something that's difficult, and it's taken me a long time to do. And it really takes a lot of energy out of you. But it's one of the key reasons, I think, why I succeeded in my career and in the complex projects that I did. I often look back and think, wow, now that I know that I'm autistic, how did I actually manage that 30 years in my career without knowing that? And it is pretty amazing, and I really don't have all the answers to all of that, except that it's probably around that observation and that clarity of thinking and that analytics, the analytical brain that I'm always getting into trouble for. So when a project was stuck, I could hold one thing in my head. I understood the dependencies, the risks, who the stakeholders were, what the constraints were. I could see that very clearly. And in my career, I have always documented that very clearly and always reiterated it back to my stakeholders and my team very clearly, not once, but throughout the project, because these are things that you can't afford to step away from, and other people do tend to step away. So I could stay with the problem long after others might have given up. And in my career, I have done a lot of projects and engagements which were successfully delivered, but they had been tried numerous times before. And some of those were projects that had been tried 3 times before and still couldn't be resolved. So what I'm saying is, as a neurodivergent person, I have skills that are my strengths, but they've not always been recognised at that. They've often been recognised as overthinking, negativity, and too much attention to detail or that hyper-focus. But it's a superpower in project management. It's how critical paths are untangled. It's how failing projects can recover, and how I've managed to see very clearly the mitigation and the way out of these tangled projects. And they're very, very often complex projects with complex people problems, but how they can be recovered. And that's often the part that people don't see. That hyperfocus takes everything. It takes a lot of energy from me, because remembering I'm not only doing the work, I'm also trying to work out how am I going to cope in this environment that's got bright lights, that's got people talking, a lot of noise. How am I going to get through that? How am I going to deal with this person that's looking at me like I'm a mad person? What are they saying? What is that on their face? So I'm constantly working overtime at about 200% to most people's 100%, because it's not just the work that I'm trying to do. That's always the easy part for me. So when it ends, I'm really tired. There's often no recovery time built into delivery expectations in projects. So it's a thing that I've learnt to manage myself And some of those things, when I was certainly able to do it as a senior project manager or program manager, or had my own company, I was able to say, look, I'm not going to have more than 3 meetings in a day. If I've had to travel by plane to an engagement, I'm not going to do that because it's just too much. I'm not going to stay somewhere that's not comfortable for me. I'm going to have this or that sort of environment that I can leave the office and I can be fully comfortable. So I was able to manage how I wanted to work, but not everybody's able to do that. So that is very distressing as an autistic person. So what looked like productivity was actually cognitive overextension. So I was, as I said, working overtime. But that hyperfocus built results. Unfortunately, burnout was the unpaid cost. So hopefully this has given you some insight into the Autistic Project Manager today, and we've been particularly talking about that superpower of seeing the strengths until it was called negativity. That's all from me. Hope you've enjoyed this podcast today and come back for more soon. Have a great day.